Let's turn our attention this Monday to escalating gun violence in the United States. According to reports, there have been at least 146 mass shootings there this year alone. In fact, some reports saying as many as 160. More than 600 in each of the last 3 years. So 160 so far, more than 600 in each of the last 3 years. Sure. Shocking numbers. While the U.S. does not have a fixed definition of a mass shooting, the Gun Violence Archive defines it as an incident where 4 or more people are shot and killed or wounded. A solution seems impossible as gun control advocates and people who lobby for the right to carry firearms fail to find each other halfway. For more on this, we're joined this morning by Gideon Chitanga, who is with the African Center for the Study of the U.S. Gideon joins us via our video link this morning. It's great to see you, Gideon. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. I mean, it's just 17 days ago that we saw that shooting in Louisville, that banking shooting that took place. It was on the 10th of April, I believe. And just days later, yet another mass shooting. We seem to be talking in circles about gun violence in the U.S.
Yes, I think this is a huge problem in the American society, and the major issue is that it plays into the political polarization between the major parties in the U.S., and therefore the key political players have failed to move beyond counter accusation about whether it's the best way forward to pass new regulations pertaining to gun control. The other thing, I think, it's a deeply entrenched ideological and constitutional order. There's a part of the U.S. Society that firmly holds onto the Second Amendment, which basically allows citizens to freely buy and own guns. But because of other pressures which are related to the American context of today, we find that gun violence is quite pervasive. Beyond what you have summarized as the mass shootings, I think it is even better to think about gun-related violence in the context of American society, particularly when we're thinking about possible solutions. Because then when you think about gun-related violence, the statistics become really staggering. And you include different forms of gun-related violence that affect communities which are marginalized and underprivileged, basically poor, those which are at the end of the margins of the class of American societies who live with gun violence on a day-to-day basis. And I would argue that the numbers of these people, the marginalized, poorer, impoverished societies who are victims of gun violence or gun-related violence are far much bigger and are underreported or quite often not even reported. So when you look at it like that, you see that the American system, particularly with respect to the issue of passing laws to regulate gun ownership and the use of guns, I think it's a bit broken. And if you compare it to other developed countries, you find that the U.S. is almost in a kind of a gun crisis. Yeah.
And one wonders what needs to happen to get out of that, the sort of revolving door of discussing one mass shooting after another. Has Joe Biden done anything in his term? And this becomes an incredibly important question going to the next election in the U.S., right? The current president has already announced that he will be running in 2024. What has he achieved in his first term?
You see, I think that the issue of gun violence is a perennial electoral issue. And unfortunately, between the parties, the Republican and the Democrats, what they debate with respect to this issue is basically institutional tinkering. Let's change the rules a bit. Let's pass some regulations a bit. Let's control access to guns a bit. So Biden has been very articulate in representing the views of the Democrats who argue for more regulation. The counter argument from the Republicans is basically that we would not allow the leftists, meaning the Republicans, to take away our individual rights because of some cases of which are emanate from criminal elements. So there is such deep division in terms of how the issues are understood or are thought about, and the focus on mass killings instead of looking at the deeper societal problems. Because if you are thinking of regulating gun ownership without addressing the socio-economic problems, including the problems related to drug abuse and causes of suicide in communities, particularly communities of the poor, I don't see that at the moment the conversations have really come down to concrete solutions. Then there are also big lobby groups that are driven by these companies that produce guns, and they are quite politically heavy. They fund politicians and political institutions, and they drive the political agenda. At the moment, they are quite keen in protecting their business, and particularly protecting the Second Amendment. So I think that for now, America will be stuck in the cycle of gun violence without a clear solution, whether it's the Republicans who are in power or the Democrats who are in power. By the way, Trump, during his term of office, he passed some regulations, but still the lobby groups who produce guns were heavily critical about them. So I think that there is need for a solution that addresses socioeconomic issues, including issues about racial exclusion in the poorer communities, and also tackles mass violence related to the use of guns, then coupled with regulations. It's really the minimum that the politicians should be looking at as they seek some comprehensive convergence.
Well, speaking of politicians, this latest shooting in Alabama, it happened at a 16-year-old birthday party. You know, we talk about what needs to happen for politicians to wake up to gun violence in the U.S. We're seeing children being killed. In this case, it was at a birthday party for a 16-year-old child. And incidentally, when you talk about politicians, Gideon, the governor in Alabama is, in fact, a strong supporter as well of Second Amendment rights, and last year signed legislation abolishing the requirement in Alabama to get a permit to carry a concealed handgun in public. In fact, her candidacy for last year's governor election was endorsed, ironically, by the National Rifle Association. So that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, these politicians come on camera and they say, you know, gun violence should come to an end in the U.S. How do we balance these two realities?
Yeah, so those realities reflect a deep crisis in the American society. It also reflects, in a way, I think that the political system is broken and in a way out of touch with the realities of the situation in the country. There is a report that actually suggests that gun violence or gun-related violence, to be specific, is quite pervasive within the age range of 4 years to 19 years. So this is your group of adolescents, and I think it ties down to the case that you just referred at the moment, just a while ago. I don't see that there is a concrete, substantial solution in the short to the medium term within the American society, either from the politicians. The lobbyists have indicated already that they will stick with the Second Amendment. And the American society will have to leverage on their key voting rights to see if they can exert pressure by way of exercising their voting rights on the Democrats and on the Republicans. But that's a long how. So it's really a struggle that Americans will have to live to continue to fight, and I think the domestic security risks will continue to be as high as we witness every day. Another shooting next week, another is shooting next month, and it's really unfortunate and sad for those who continue to lose lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the politicians on the one hand. It's the gun violence issue insofar as an electioneering tool is concerned as we build up to the next elections in the U.S. But to be frank, Gideon, it's not just at a political level where there's a struggle to push through amendments insofar as carrying guns are concerned or bearing arms concerned in that country. People, many Americans themselves, want gun rights to be protected.
Yes, certainly, because like I said earlier, particularly for those who are directly activists or supporters or associated with themselves with the Republican Party, they hold very firmly to the Second Amendment, and this is like more like a cultural, ideological kind of belief. It's our American way, and it's our rights. I think that's the belief, and their response to cases of violence is really between insensitive to quite shocking, in the sense that they go on to describe the perpetrators as people who are either suffering from mental health problems or criminals and so on. They don't want to see this problem as a societal problem. But added to that, the production and selling of guns is big business in the U.S., basically because there are people who believe in the Second Amendment. The main way of dealing with the gun problem would be strict regulation that regulates access and use of guns between the military security institutions and for civilian purposes, which should be for specific civilian purposes. But in the case of the U.S., individuals own guns as part of their culture, as part of their belief system, for the fun of it. And unfortunately, these guns end up being used for other things, including criminal activities. And where they are used for criminal activities, they are part of a complex web of issues that feeds into crime, murder, mass murder, and violence. And so this would require such a comprehensive, I think, intervention that deals with the cultural, ideational beliefs of the society on one end, the regulatory issues on the other, and the broader socio-economic system, particularly in respect of how gun violence is linked to deprived social conditions, particularly in the poorer sections of the American society.
Gideon Chitanga, let me thank you for your time this morning. Gideon is with the African Center for the Study of the U.S. Yet another mass shooting in that country, this time in Alabama. 160 shootings, mass shootings in the U.S. this year alone.